Welcome. This is Greenwood Associates GS Counselor discussion. Today we're going to be talking about the Holland Code and John Holland's work. And so let's go ahead and get started. So we'll go ahead and notice that the book that we're going to be reviewing today, Making Vocational Choices, was printed in 1997. So it's over 20 years old. And a lot of the presentation today are direct quotes from the book. And so if they seem dated, they could very well be. This is some research that was done a long time ago, but it is important because it has been picked up and used as a primary tool in the career counseling field. So while it's old, it's given it a chance to take hold, and it's really an important part of what we do as career counselors and how we understand the world of work. So John Holland did this work at Johns Hopkins University, and the purpose of his theory was to answer three questions. What personality and environment characteristics lead to satisfying career decisions, involvement, and achievement? So really what we're looking at are personal and environmental characteristics that lead to positive outcomes and in their career decisions, and what personal and environmental characteristics lead to stability of a person in a career, or their or the reason why they may change careers. And then what do we do? How can we help people who are deciding or switching between careers? So I guess what I want to really point out here is that it is personal and environmental characteristics that we are looking at, and how best to help people using that knowledge. Okay, so basically, John Holland says that there are six types of people: realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. And there are six types of work environments that are characterized by the exact same six models. And that better matches between person and environment lead to better outcomes. And really, Holland Code is that simple. It's basically matching people to their environment and using the model of the six different personality types and the six model environments. So better outcomes are defined by the ability to make a choice and pick a vocation, by staying in that vocation and achieving in that vocation, choosing the right education and achieving in that education, becoming personally competent, and then having positive social behaviors, such as being a contributing member of society. And then the last thing is the susceptibility to influence of the dominant ethos. And what he means by this is that every environment has an ethos. And if you're congruent with that environment, then you will adopt that ethos and get better at doing whatever it is that's done within that environment. So those that are poorly placed are less likely to change and less likely to grow in that environment. So you want to find environments for which that dominant ethos is one in keeping with who you are, so that you will feed that environment and it will feed you. That's what he means by susceptibility of influence of dominant ethos. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So there are four working assumptions. And he hedges his bets here. He says, in our culture, so he's making it part of our culture, most people can be categorized into one of the six personality types. That's one assumption. And there are many reasons why people tend to be like one of these six. There's many cultural and personal factors. There are parents, there are peers, there are social class, there's culture, there's your hereditary attributes, who you are innately, and your physical environment. All of those things make you prefer certain activities. Then those activities lead to strong interests. Those strong interests lead to competencies. Those competencies lead to a disposition. And then that disposition makes you predisposed to like certain activities. So this is the feedback loop that he says creates who you are and makes you one of these 6 types of people. The fact that you have preferred activities, then those activities lead to interest. Once you're interested in them, you learn about them, practice them, you become competent, and that creates your personality, and then it feeds on itself. Now, in the Greenwood system, this is something we're looking for. We're looking for that personal disposition, and we do so by the structured interview, the resume, the college, the high school or college or work resumes, the histories of interest, the family history. We're looking for what influences have made them who they are, and how strong is that through line. So we very much assume that this is true and make it part of the Greenwood system. This is how one of the ways in which we've adopted the Holland Code and Holland system. There are 6 models. This is his second of the 4 working assumptions. Each environment is dominated by personality types. The environments become a reflection of those in the environment. People in that environment have similar outlooks and solve problems with that are congruent with their interests. They surround themselves with people, tools, materials, and activities congruent with their interests, and that environment can be measured. So the measurement that he uses is putting the 6 letters in a certain order, and that's what is the Holland Code. So in this example, 64 this it's 100%, and 64% of this one environment has to do with conventional. So C is the first letter, and then the next highest letter is E, R, and so on. So that's the second assumption, that there are 6 model environments. And of course, we have the Holland codes coded for each of the careers so that we know what those environments are. And people search out the environments that allow them to exercise their skills, abilities, and express their attitudes and values and take on agreeable problems and roles. And then the behavior is determined by the interaction between the personality and the environment. Again, we just get back to good personality environment fit will predict positive outcomes in job stability, personal competencies, educational achievement, and positive social behavior. So those are the 4 working assumptions. The secondary assumptions are that there is a degree of relatedness between the personality type and between the environmental models. So what this means is, and it's best done by example, if you've got somebody who's an RI, so realistic is their dominant and investigative is their secondary, it is more likely that they will be successful in an RI career than an RS career. So degree of relatedness. Basically, you're looking for things that are very much like them and not unlike them. And of course, we do matching with the Holland Code. Then there's differentiation. Some people in some environments are more differentiated, meaning that they have more dominance or less dominance. And he calls that degree of differentiation. And in his estimation, higher degrees of estimation or degrees of differentiation are better, which we'll see in a second. But there is differentiation, and we have the Holland Code there too. Identity is the clarity and stability of a person's identity, and that can be estimated as well. So those are the secondary assumptions. Then there's congruencies. Different personality types require different work environments. And then there's the calculus. And this is basically that model that there is an inverse relationship between the strength of the association and the distance between them, so that the R's are more likely to also be investigative or conventional and less likely to be social. So this hexagonal model is set up in such a way to show you that there is a relationship between these letters, and there are letters that are more closely associated with each other and those that are less associated with each other. Okay, background principles. The choice of vocation is an expression of personality. Interest inventories are personality inventories. That vocational stereotypes have reliable and important psychological and sociological meaning. That members of a vocation have similar personalities and similar histories of personal development. And that because people in a vocational group have similar personalities, they will respond in similar ways, and it will create an interpersonal environment. But again, the background principle, vocational satisfaction, stability, and achievement depends on the congruency between one's personality and the environment in which one works. Again, we're just back to the better the fit, the better the outcome. And we match people with their top career preferences because we also believe that the match between the person and the environment is high degree of success. Okay, this is where I was saying that the greater degree of differentiation, the greater likelihood of success. So if you have someone who is a strong R, then they are going to be more likely to be successful in an R environment, but they're also more likely to be successful than others in that environment who don't have as strong a letter as they do. Individuals who are most congruent are more influenced by the environment, as I mentioned before. So if they are an R, they're going to adopt the mores of the R environment, and that's going to make them a better R. Someone who isn't like that in the environment is going to be less susceptible to the environment, and then therefore less susceptible to the influences of it and less susceptible to success. Those who are less congruent are more likely to leave and change their environment. And in summary, high degree of differentiation and strong identity is good. Low degree of differentiation and weak identity is bad. All right, he talks a little bit about the stability and says that stability is the norm, and there's reasons for that. Because employers discourage change through hiring practices and age biases, and that most environmental factors, friends, family, coworkers, also press for stability for reasons of friendship, income, and power. He says that change is possible, but it's better to choose the first time. Okay, formulation of type. So these are the different types of environment and types of people. So you've got the realistic types, and this is straight out of the book. This is copied from the book. So R's prefer R occupations and dislike S occupations. They can associate with people who have similar beliefs, interests, and values, but they avoid people who don't have their interests, beliefs, and values. And he says R's have a narrow range of interests. He says that they like traditional values. They prefer to work within institutional restraints. They believe in independence and freedom. They value ambition, self-control. They're practically minded, and they like concrete things. They do not value forgiveness. They have a very closed system of belief and values and a narrow range of interests. Their self-beliefs are that they have mechanical and technical and athletic abilities. They enjoy working with their hands, tools, mechanisms, and electronics. They lack ability. They perceive their own lack of ability in human relations, and they remember disliking or doing poorly in scholarly activities. And they have low self-esteem, but they're confident in their abilities to be mechanical and have those R skills. They use R skills to solve problems. They prefer them to be concrete and practical, and like structure, and they dislike clerical, scholarly, or imaginative activities. The environment in which they work, they prefer R activities like using machine. The environments stimulate people to do R activities and use machines and tools. They foster technical competencies. They encourage people to have mechanical abilities, but they they see them as lacking in human relation. And then their worldview is very simple, tangible, and traditional. And they reward people for traditional values and attitudes, for things like being concerned with goods, money, power, and possession. The I's prefer I activities, dislike E activities, can find people with similar beliefs and values, avoid people with different beliefs and values. They value scientific and scholarly activities. They prefer working within institutional restraints. They believe in self-determination. Important values are intellect, logic, ambition. What is not important? Family security, being cheerful, having true friendships. Open to new ideas and experiences, and have a wide range of interests. They believe themselves having good mathematical and scientific abilities. They enjoy reading or thinking about solutions. They believe persuasion and persuading others is frustrating. So they don't like to persuade others. They're broad-minded with wide interests and moderate to high self-esteem. Okay. They rely on thinking, gathering data, scholarly practices, and less attention to feelings or social environments. Now, the environments stimulate investigative activities. They encourage scientific competencies. They encourage people to have mathematical and scientific abilities, but they also lack the leadership ability. They like to see the world as complex, abstract, independent, and original ways. And then they reward people for scientific values and attitudes. The A's, not surprisingly, prefer A activities and dislike C activities. They can associate with other people having similar beliefs and values. They do avoid people with dissimilar beliefs and values. Life goals, they value aesthetics, experience, achievement. They believe in self-determination. The important values are self-expression, equity for all, being imaginative and courageous. Not so important is obedient, logical, and responsible. And they have a liberal, open-minded belief system and values. Self-beliefs, originality, expression, nonconformity. They believe themselves as having artistic, musical abilities. They dislike business activities and keeping accurate records. And they like to use A skills to solve problems and rely on intuition and expression and originality. Their environments encourage A activities. It fosters A competencies. And it encourages them to be expressive, original, intuitive, nonconforming, and independent. And they believe themselves as having artistic abilities. And they see the world as complex, independent, unconventional, and in flexible ways. And they are rewarded for artistic values and attitudes. The socials, they prefer S and dislike R. They can associate with people having similar values. Notice that they do not avoid other people like the other ones so far. They do not avoid, because their life goals is they're very helpful, and they like to help and forgive. What's not important to them are logic, intellect, and having an exciting life. They aspire to become part of competent parents, teachers, or therapists. What's that? Oh, yeah. They value religion. They, let's see, lacking in mechanical or scientific. They have a moderately open system, but somewhat traditional, with moderate self-esteem. And they use social beliefs to solve problems, and they rely on mutual interactions. Of course, the environment that they are in has S activities. They foster social competencies. They like helping others, being cooperative and social, and they see the world in flexible ways because they're dealing with so many different people. They're they're required to have more flexibility in their value system. And they're rewarded for social values and attitudes. The enterprisers prefer E and dislike I. They can associate with people having different belief systems. Again, they do not avoid people with dissimilar. They have traditional values. Controlling others, independence, and ambition are important values for them. Forgiving and helping is not important to them. And they aspire to become leaders and influential, and they like to dress well. They believe themselves to be aggressive, popular, self-confident, and social. They possess leadership skills and speaking abilities. They lack scientific abilities. They have traditional values. They're somewhat closed in their belief system, and they have high self-esteem. They're the highest of all the self-esteem letters, the E's. And they use control and a traditional belief to solve problems. Their environments, they're stimulated, such as selling and leading people, their enterprising accomplishments, and they're encouraged, the environments in which they operate encourage you to be aggressive, popular, self-confident, social, and possessing leadership and speaking abilities. They see the world in terms of power, status, and responsibility, and in a stereotyped, constrictive, and simple terms. And lastly, we have the conventionals. The conventionals prefer C, dislike A. They can associate, but they do avoid other people with dissimilar values. They prefer structured work environments. Important things to them are ambitions, obedience, and politeness. Things that are not important to them are aesthetics, close relationships, forgiveness, and imagination. They aspire to work hard and lead comfortable lives, and they have a very closed system of beliefs. They believe in conformity and orderliness. They possess clerical and numerical abilities. They love keeping track of things. And they have the lowest self-esteem of all the letters, according to John Holland. They like to solve problems using C skills. They like to have practices, rules, and procedures to follow. They look to authority figures for counsel, advice, and they have difficulty with ambiguity, and they prefer that there be more structure to what it is they're doing. They like conventional activities like recording, organizing, and record keeping. They foster C competencies and achievements. Their environments in which they operate encourage them to conform, be orderly, non-artistic, and to have clerical competencies. The worldview is very conventional, stereotype, constrictive, simple, and dependent. And they reward people for attitudes, conventional attitudes, such as money, dependability, and conformity. The formulations of type, these words, and I'll let you just run your eye down that list of words. Those words are used to describe both the R person and the R environment. And I, there are the words that you can see for I, the analytical, precision, unassuming, introspective. The A words are more about the expressive, idealistic, impulsive, non-conforming, original. S's are very agreeable, friendly, helpful, kind, understanding, warm. The E's are more adventurous, ambitious, assertive, energetic, forceful, self-confident. And the C's are very careful, conforming, conscientious, methodical, obedient, unimaginative. So now we know the words and the environments and the types of people. Now, how do you use this? The practical application of the theory. So this gets to the third question: how do we help people with this knowledge and with this theory? And as I've said, it's very much figuring out who they are. So he uses a diagnostic inventory to find out their disposition. And the self-directed search is the instrument that was developed directly from John Holland's work. So the SDS is used to find the disposition, and then you use that profile to predict categories of congruent occupations. So if they're an RI, you look in the RI categories. And you identify some specific occupations in congruent categories with their help. And then you give them whatever assistance they need. But you're looking at their letters and you're looking at the letters of the job. Now, so the congruency principle is what we're talking about here. Use the understanding of the letters in the occupation to facilitate the discussion between the different types of occupation. So, for example, if you're deciding between an ISA job and an ESA job, then you discuss the importance of I versus E with the client. Now, we also believe that it's important that the client understand the Holland Code, and that's why 2 pages of our report uses all those words to describe the different Holland letters. So when you do get to the point where you're looking at jobs, you're able to differentiate the different jobs by their letters because they are descriptive of the environments. So that's really it. That's how he says you help people. You figure out their letters, you look at the environments, and then you match those two, and you make recommendations and help them. Annette, do you have a question?
No, I'm just baffled by the client I just previously talked to you about doing this, how this will probably be very, very important. So I'm really glad I'm watching this today.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really
Dan, quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there research on how those environments have migrated over the last 25 years since?
That's a really good question. And how those environments are measured is yet another discussion topic what happens is if you look up in John Holland has a book, or the Holland Codes has a book with all of the letters. But when you look at different sources, like the Strong Interest Inventory uses different letters than John Holland. And the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, which is the one we use, actually has different letters for some of the environments. So not only do they migrate, Andrew, but they also aren't measured across the board. So it's hard to say. Now, I can tell you the way the Bureau of Labor and Statistics measures it is through surveys. So they have surveyed the people working in those jobs to find out what they do on a daily activity, on a daily basis, and what's important to them and what do they value, and then they come up with the Holland Code based on that. Strong Interest Inventory went about it in another way. They took people that were in the industry and said, "What are you interested in?" And then based it off of that. So things like the airline stewardesses have a very high A on the Strong because a lot of the people that are airline stewardesses or airline stewards are also interested in the arts. It doesn't have much to do with what they do on a daily basis, but they as a group kind of demonstrated an interest in art. Whereas if you look in the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, it only looks at what they do on a daily basis. And when you look at it that way, they don't do much that's artistic. They're very much hands-on and conventional. They serve a lot of people, and they have a lot of interactions with people. So there's a lot of S and a lot of C and a lot of E because they're also managing a plane. They're having to tell people what to do. A is not a big letter, in the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, but it is in the strong. So that's an example of how squishy the letters can be when applied to careers. But it would be interesting because the Bureau of Labor and Statistics has been doing this for about 15 years. That would be interesting to look to see if there has been some migration, because that would be available.
Right. Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So if we look, and this is all out of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Yeah, I'm going to have to read it to you. So these are the first letters. So there are about 1,000 jobs, and 397 of them begin with the letter R. Okay, so R is a huge. Now, this is the number of job titles. This is not how many people work in that industry. These are the number of job titles. Enterprising, investigative, social, and conventional all have about the same number, about 123 to 149, 26 title differences. But look at A. A has very few titles, 37 titles total that begin with the letter A. Huge discrepancy. So let's actually, so this is what we saw before. The realistics have 397 job titles. The artistic have 37 job titles. Now let's actually see where people are working. So we see that R has 36.8 million people working in it. So it not only has the largest number of job titles, it also has the largest number of people working in that field, beginning with the letter R. But the second highest number of people working in a field that begins with a single letter, it's the conventionals. 27.2 million people work in a field that begins with the letter C. And then 25.2 million begin or work in E. Investigative is 7 million, and artistic is 1.4 million. So again, that artistic, there aren't a lot of job titles, and there aren't a lot of people doing that straight up A job. Now, what's interesting about that is we see a disproportionate number of people coming to us for career advice who are expressing A as a very dominant letter, which is very interesting. It is definitely not representative of the population. And there could be a number of factors, and I wouldn't want to, I can think of factors, but I wouldn't know how to attribute.
And this is our therapeutic population.
Our therapeutic population, yeah, which, could be that the art people, non-conforming, very original, they have a harder time in this world where most of the people are ours, right? And most of the jobs are ours, which, is very different than them. So this is really interesting to see how the R's are the most, and then conventional. A lot of people keeping track of things. A lot of people building things, and then a lot of people keeping track of things. The enterprisers are the managers, and then you've got the people helping each other, the socials. The investigatives, the 7 million, those are the doctors and the engineers, and there aren't as many of them, 7 million of them. And then you've got the artistic people. So, and that we'll see some actual job titles here in a minute. So the other thing that I kind of found interesting as I was studying the Holland Code and running the numbers is that, that again, that first column we've already seen, 397 jobs that start with the letter R, and then 37 jobs that start with the letter A. But the number of second letters, conventional, takes up most of the second and third letters. And then the I's take up most of the second and third letters. The A, again, just not really a big player. It's just, there's not a lot of people being creative, strictly straight up creative or require creativity. Many more people need to build things, and then many people need to keep track of things, is what we're kind of seeing in the distribution of job titles and in the distribution of people working in different careers. All right, so this is interesting. If we look at the letter R, so there's 397 that begin with the letter R. Here are the jobs and all three letters. So look at that RCI. So there's 390, almost 400 jobs that have R as the first letter. 152 of those titles are RCIs, realistic, conventional, investigative. Okay, now I can't show you all of those jobs, so I'm just going to show you like the first 40 or so in alphabetical order. Okay, so these are people that are doing hands-on activities in a very structured way, and they have to have some form of schooling, some form of knowledge about what they're doing. So you can see this has everything from airline pilot to embalmer, civil drafter to drywall installer. Now, this is where I think the SDS and the Holland Code kind of falls down, because you could have someone who's an RCI and they would have 152 titles to choose from. And so that's too many. And this is where the Greenwood system takes into account many other factors, values, abilities, and personality, whereas it's not just their interests that it's taking here. So, but those are the kinds of jobs that are in the RCI, and that's 152 of the 400 or so job titles. Now, the enterprising, there are 150 of them, approximately 149. 40 of them are in that ECR. And just to give you an idea of what the ECR jobs are, here they are. So you can see that they're a little bit more in a leadership role, air traffic controller, door-to-door salesperson, correctional officer, but they're working in a conventional environment, and they're being hands-on. They're doing something. They're selling things. The online merchant, the parts salesperson. Okay. Now, if we go to the investigative, the IRC has the most number of jobs at 40. And here are the IRCs. And sometimes it's easier just to run your eye over the backside of the list. So you see that they're engineers and technicians and technologists. And and we also see that they're chemists and biologists.
And also doctor or medical jobs that don't involve that social interaction as much.
Right. Doctors are either IRs or ISs.
And these are the people that are shifting a lot of the employment world.
Yeah, good.
Their activities. These are the people, that migration question. So if you look at the RCI category, for example, and how those job titles change over time, in part because of the activities of this group.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, yep. I think that's an excellent observation, Andrew. The socials, SIA is the dominant letter. And if you look at them, they're the teachers, they're the psychologists, they're the counselors, social workers,
nurse.
Yep. And in the conventional, the CES is the biggest letter. And those, if you look at the right-hand side, those are the clerks and, the assistants. But they're definitely the bean counters. And then the artistic, I just list all 37. So these are all 37 of the artistic jobs that begin with the letter A. Everything from fine artists to graphic designer to video game designer. You see that model and singer, musicians are on here. But again, these are only 1.4 million people in all 300 million people in the United States. And they occupy this very small category of jobs. But I think they're overrepresented in our world of career counseling. Then we've got the archetype job. So I just wanted to throw this up here so you could see that the accountants are very conventional, enterprising, with some knowledge. You've got the artists, who are the A's. The business people are the ECs. And we've come to think of the EC as kind of a letter in itself, that you don't necessarily, when you're talking about an EC, you're not necessarily talking about someone who is the leader in a conventional environment as much as sometimes you're talking about someone who's working in a business environment. You've got the construction people. Those are the realistic conventionals. The doctors are the ISs or the IRs. The engineers are almost exclusively the IRs. Lawyers are EIAs. Teachers and counselors are the SIAs. Now, looking at this list, what would you guess is the single first letter that earns the most amount of money?
I.
Very good. Yes. The I's make, and this is all of the jobs whose letter begin with whose job Holland Code begins.
Hey, this is Annette. I think I'm going to lose you guys.
Okay.
Whoa, she's
I'm
gone.
going to lose you guys. So I'm just going to say goodbye now, but I'm going to try to listen in as I drive.
Okay.
Okay, take care, Annette.
Bye, Annette.
Bye, Annette.
So here the I's are making, when you take all their jobs begin with the letter I and average their salaries, they're in about 80. Enterprisers are at 65. The socials are 54. Artistics are 44 maybe. Conventionals 42. And then the realistics are under $40,000, making half as much as those that go to college and graduate school and become the engineers and the doctors and so forth.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. That's really good.
Tells you a lot about what drives our socioeconomic and political world around.
Yeah. And the other thing about, as you look at this, realistics, the hard R jobs require the least amount of re-education. Those that are in the investigative fields are continuously going back to school because of their licensures, because of their fields of study. Things are constantly changing. So a scholarship is more important in the I, and active learning is more important in the I, whereas the R job can be more less requiring of them to acquire new skills. And I think stonemason is the one job that requires the least amount of active learning. That once you learn how to build a stone wall, you'll know how to do it for the rest of your life. And the technology hasn't changed a whole lot since the Babylonian times. So So
it comes to mind. You see a lot of like Coursera and edX, some of these massive online type in the micro masters programs, and I can see where those are very well targeted to that investigative and enterprising sector. That a lot of the advanced tools of futuristic education are being targeted on that upper end.
Yeah. And having done a lot of MOOCs, I can tell you that they're heavily weighted towards the math science, computer science. it's easier to deliver content in an asynchronous format when it's more logical than it is. It's hard to find a poetry course online that's
Right.
in a MOOC format, given that it's not as procedural. Whereas, I have found those MOOCs fantastic for my, own education for programming purposes.
The poets are still at little retreats.
Well, there are many of them either, so
Yeah.
Oh well.
yeah.
Great.
You don't need to build for that small $1.4 million or 4 million person industry. Yeah. All right, that's what I have for the presentation. Any questions that you guys have or comments? Anything ring true or wish you knew more about?
Just that, Dan, you need to write the updated version of the book.
Tell him how much that book costs.
Actually, I found other copies that were less expensive. Yeah, no.
He was looking at
the originals were the 350. I went searching for the book and I couldn't find one for less than like $350, and I was shocked. But it turns out that I was looking at original copies, and not just knockoff copies.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think that I think what Mom you added to this field, the book and what he did is great, but it has its limitations because just figuring out their letters is not good enough. There are a lot of other factors that have to be taken into consideration. And what you'll notice about the matches that we make is that sometimes, more often than not, there will be jobs that aren't their exact Holland Code that will match with them better than their Holland Code letters. And it's because we're taking into account so many other factors. And we find that that's a more accurate reflection of the job and who they are. It needs to be unbundled and made a little more complex. But I agree with the foundations of his work, and we rely heavily on it. But what Mom has done is expand that work to include more elements of personality and ability and as well as their interests. Although John Holland calls it both an interest inventory and a personality inventory. And there's a really interesting correlation between Jungian theory and John Holland's work, but that would be the topic of a whole nother discussion. But how does that worldview that they measure through Jungian theory, through Myers-Briggs, correlate to the Holland Code? And how can you use Jungian theory to also inform our understanding of which jobs would be better matches?
It came to mind that as you were talking about the archetypes and the different, I'm often around people that have gotten heavily into the Enneagram.
Yes.
Dynamic, which of course is very correlated to Myers-Briggs and Jungian, and the whole history there is kind of fascinating. But I could see where someone with that background could also take to what comes out of this whole assessment.
Yeah, our process correlates very well with someone who is into that, because one of the things that we stress is that self-knowledge, and somebody who's gone through the Enneagram really has a lot of self-knowledge, and that helps in the whole process of career counseling. And then they understand, and frequently they're also know their Holland Code and their Myers-Briggs. Those people are really into the assessment and then understanding personality type. So
yes,
true, absolutely.
Well, I think it's. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yes, you were saying, Mom?
Okay. I think it's important that what we've done and what this is John Holland's foundation that everything is kind of built on. But I think that all of the things that have come out subsequent to that, it is really what I like what you're doing is, showing the foundation, but then talking about the changes that have taken place since that time. And you know, Andrew, what you said is how is it evolving today? You know, how is this evolved in today's world? Because, you know, it does depend on who you're looking at. I just, believe it or not, I just looked at some self-directed searches I had on clients. I had some files on it, and you know, it just gives you that big laundry list, and it's pages and pages and pages of each of the different combinations. I mean, it's so confusing. And so it's taken time to fine-tune this process. But you can fine-tune this process in many different ways. And we have taken one approach. The strong interest inventory has taken another approach. And each, you know, my plan has taken another approach. And so what you have to do, I played with all of those when I started. And then synthesized and put together what I felt best met my clients' needs. And that's what Dan has taken to the next level, quite frankly, with the exceptionalities as well. But I think you know, you have to decide which way, you know, kind of which theory and how you're going to put it together, and not to confuse clients with it. You know?
Right.
I mean, it could be very easy to confuse clients, and I think that's what we've tried to do in terms of our report, is to help explain it in the simplest of ways, and you can see that it's not very simple, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
No, that's great. Yeah, good context.
Great.
All right. So
Excellent place to end on. Thank you guys for
Thank you all.
for attending, and this will be posted. Unfortunately, the first couple slides won't be on there, but our voices will be, I guess.
okay.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, if nothing else, see you next month, right?
Yep. All right. Take
Thank
care,
you.
guys.
See you, Janet. Okay.
Take
All
care,
right.
Andrew.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Dana.
Bye-bye. Bye, Dana.
Bye.
Bye, Jeanette.